GPI is proud to partner with the local office of global consulting firm Slalom to provide bi-weekly webinars called Leading Through Uncertainty. Uncertainty is a word we are all familiar with these days, and it's to help you stay successful in working in a virtual world. Thank you to Amelia Goodwin and everyone at Slalom for partnering with us on this opportunity. Today, our topic is activating your virtual team, keeping your team engaged and high performing. And we're pleased to have Julie Cline Fernández from Slalom's Portland office here to share practical tips and tools that will help guide, support, and empower a high-performing team today and into the future. Feel free to ask questions in chat as we go along, and also you can ask questions at the end. She'll address them then. Julie has worked across the globe to help clients think strategically about how to integrate proven approaches and new innovations to engage their most critical stakeholders and solve challenging problems. Lots of problems. So let's just welcome Julie. Thanks, Julie.
Hi, thanks so much, Cara, and thank you to all of you who have joined today. Really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to go through this content with you. Please let us know if you've got questions. Put those in the chat, and I'll try and create some spaces to answer questions that you may have. Also wanted to mention that we will share with you this deck, this presentation following, so you don't have to scurry to scribble quick notes here. We will send this to you and follow up. Presentation is not advancing. There we go. Awesome. So my bio sounds amazing, but I wanted to share with you. Yes, I have worked with many different clients. These are currently my clients and coworkers. And as we're all in this new normal together, we've gotten a lot more time with them. So they are my less virtual team. And this is a socially distant photographer that goes around the area and takes photos. So I thought we'd clean up and get dressed for once and take a photo. But this is what it's like on the inside, right? Each of us has our own challenges as we're working in this new environment. And it's pretty challenging, but there's definitely a new operating environment, and I thought I would share with you mine. But on a more serious note, this is a really challenging time for leaders, and there's a lot of conversation around what we're each faced with. Certainly work-life boundaries are blurred, revenues are challenged. There's a demand to rethink our priorities very rapidly. And in the public sector, certainly there's an inability and a lack of capacity around procuring services and responding to an increased demand from the public. Last week, Slalom participated or facilitated a CIO roundtable that talked about some of those really significant challenges. But we're hearing a revenue loss, budget cuts, inability to procure services, and it's gloom and doom. But the challenge is also an opportunity, and that's what we really wanted to talk with you about today. So we're going to talk a little bit about where we're at and what we're learning in this new environment. And again, it's not all bad. It's a real opportunity for us as leaders to really think about how we show up and how we lead these teams. We're going to talk a little bit about some of these guiding principles that should drive our behavior as leaders. And then we're going to spend the majority of the time on some practical tools to activate and engage our teams. All right, so let's get going. Operating in a virtual world. This is something that there's been so much content about. I get an email at least once a day that talks about what we need to do as a checklist to talk to our teams, collaborate with people, engage on digital platforms. But really at the heart of this is the piece that we can't possibly miss is how this is really a team, a very healthy, high-functioning, highly effective team really needs to be led by a common vision, built on trust, and a real clear agreement of how we'll work together. And so those are important tenets in any team, but they're even harder to address and harder to create in today's complex and uncertain environment. I just want to pause for a minute. I know that there are a range of different different organizations represented on the phone. And so it merits a little bit of reference to what we mean by a team. This could be about the people that actually report to you, your direct reports. This could also be the teams that you operate on or the groups that you engage with. So our hope is that this will be practical enough that you can take some of the tools and make them right for your organization, regardless of the environment that you're working in. And we'll talk a little bit about how to tailor those for your organization. So as we know, this remote environment has been thrust on many of us, but I think it merits looking at the fact that 56% of the workforce has a job compatible with remote work. And I know there's variance in how we look at that figure. There's a variety based on the subset that you choose. But the real piece here is that compared to that 56%, there's really only 3.6% that actually worked from home. And 80%, at least post-COVID, wanted to work from home. Those figures may change in a post-COVID environment when we've all been stuck together. But the prediction on the table right now is that 25 to 30% of the workforce will actually work from home multiple days a week by the end of 2021. And so that number may even grow depending on our plans for reentry. But the point here is that this isn't just a response to COVID. This is an opportunity for us to prepare for a new way of working. And so some of the tools that we'll dive into, they have a much longer lifespan than hunkering down and saying, how am I going to engage and connect with the people that I work with and do what I used to do before? It's an opportunity to rethink what that looks like. So in this experiment, we've had 7 weeks of it. How's it going? This is what we're seeing. It's not awesome. The COVID situation makes many of us feel helpless and anxious. There are distractions abounding. People are really missing that connection that they got in hallway conversations. And there's a real question around whether people are actually engaged in the conversation via these digital platforms. As I mentioned before, in the CIO roundtable, there was really a solid conversation around how do we need to rethink our role in this environment? And what are we seeing? As I probably don't need to belabor this point, but we're all faced with learning new digital tools, packing our days with calls, trying to get done what we were supposed to do before this. And we're trying to execute those goals in a really new climate. I think what we're seeing is that there's really a sense of overwhelm. There is a sense of trying to do all of the things on one hand and a sense of isolation on the other hand. I think the note that I saw, or the research that I saw, said that the average employee is working around 3 hours longer to try and get everything done. So there's definitely disruption, concerns about productivity, competing priorities, and lots of distractions. For many leaders, there's a whole new layer or work stream of our work focused on how do we engage people? And that feels like more, not less. I also got an email from, maybe you're like me, you've gotten an email from everyone you've ever touched on how to do this right. So today we hope to clear through the clutter. So the quicker you accept the things you cannot change, the faster you're able to take action on the things that you can. And that's what today is really about. Again, there's a lot of content out there telling us how to do this well and do this right. But we hope to be really practical. So this is an oldie but a goodie I thought I'd dust off from Stephen Covey around the circles of focus. You might be familiar with these. This is a simple tool to help us really clear through the clutter during these times. The outer circle is our circle of concern. These are things that we have relatively little control over, if at all. This is about when things will reopen, the state of the global pandemic, the state's response to COVID. This is the economy. These are things that we are reacting to while we have little control over them. The next circle is our circle of influence. This might be things in the organization that we may have a particular point of view on. things that we can influence as leaders, and definitely a lot more proactive, but we may or may not have control over them entirely. The circle of control is that inner sphere, and this is really the opportunity for us as leaders right now and as people to really think about what is in our sphere of control. These are the things that we must really seek to understand, be curious about. And the interesting thing about this circle is it actually grows the more time you spend. And so the question on the table is, how can we as leaders and people spend more time there? And how can we help those on our teams or those we work with really spend more time there? Where are you spending your time today? And how can you help your teams to increase their focus there? Again, this circle, the longer we stay there, the more we are curious and confident, and put things in that circle that we can control, the larger that circle gets. So given what you know and where you're at today, the question is what you can do to increase your team's focus. And so we have a framework for looking at team excellence, not only during these times, but particularly valuable and critical during these times. And so our team excellence framework is really focused on getting into that circle of control. At the heart of it is building trust with those that we work with. And around the corners, we ask the questions of how will we collaborate with each other? How do we stay connected? Again, this is where we spent the most time, I would argue, in this virtual environment. How do we connect? How do we collaborate? How do we do that digitally? The other element we've spent less time in. So on the align part of the model, how have our goals actually changed? Should our roles and responsibilities shift to actually get the work done? How do we adapt in the achieve sector? How do we actually adapt and achieve our goals? How do we plan for the future? Does that require a reset? And then grow. Based on what we've learned today, this is really the time to ask each other what we've learned from this experiment and how we can grow and improve together. And again, each of these is more challenging in a virtual environment, so we really need to invest the time to make space for visiting each one. All right, so let's get to work. I would encourage you, if you have any questions, to ask those in the chat, but we're gonna explore each of the elements of this model with a super practical tool. I will warn you that there's a lot of content here, but again, we'll send you the slides so that you can actually adapt these for your own use based on your needs with your team. All right, so these four tools to help you and your teams increase focus. Again, some of them are really very intuitive. What I have learned is that there is more value in the conversation than there is in any one of these tools unto itself. And they can be super powerful. Number one, we're going to go through a personal canvas that helps us share around where we're at with each other. Number two is the team reset. Number three is the team norm. And number four is the retrospective. All right. So at the heart of the model is building trust. And there's a lot of content that says you should do all of these things. But what's something concrete that we can introduce to the people that we work with to make sure that we are really having the right conversations? And so here's one simple tool. It's called a personal canvas. It is basically a document that tells you more about each other. It pulls your team members into a dialogue. It can be used as part of a team kickoff if you're working with a new team. It can also be used with an existing team. And so while the questions can be adapted for your organization to visit what's right, the key point is it doesn't just talk about, these are my work preferences. I work with these, I have a 5th grader and a 2nd grader, and I'm juggling multiple aspects of my life right now. It explores what I'm concerned about and also what I'm excited about. It's an opportunity to really revisit where everybody is at in a more authentic way. And so sometimes it's, well, we know this to be true, that we must increase vulnerability and connection and trust, and also demonstrate empathy during this challenging time. We don't always have the tools to know the right conversations to have and the questions to ask. And so this is an opportunity to do just that. So here's the example. Again, I'll send it to you, but it has a lot more on the table than what is my remote work environment. And so as leaders, how can you encourage your teams to explore each of these different aspects? Then there's a list of fun questions. Again, you can use these during a team kickoff, or I would encourage you to think about, can you ask your employees or your teammates to complete one and then spread those throughout many virtual meetings. But again, this is the starting place to really understand where we're all at. So here's my example. Again, it's a fun exercise to really think about, what do I hope for, and what are my challenges, and helping us to understand each other better. I have found incredible value in sharing these with each other, and we at Slalom, we use those as a part of kicking off any team, virtual or in person. The questions here are tailored to a virtual environment, but they can definitely be used for in person as well. Any questions? Are there any questions, Amelia, in the chat? A lot to explore here.
The question right now is around, not necessarily on this tool, but thinking about how we think about business networking and that network and how that might evolve as we go forward. So maybe as we wrap up in the end, coming back to that one.
Perfect. Great. Yeah, absolutely. One small comment here is it's a fun exercise to go through for yourselves as a sort of inventory or a reflection of where you're at. So even if you can't use this and put this into practice with a team tomorrow, it could also be just a fun exercise to do with the people that you know in your network, your professional network, or home. Okay.
One thing I would add to that, Julie, going back, is the other way that we use this is just looking at the question. And peppering in a question with each meeting, just to change the dynamics of a meeting and change the dynamics of what you're doing, just to get to know each other in a little bit different way.
Absolutely. No, thanks for that, Amelia. I mean, I think that this is really about how do you show real interest in each other without saying, how's it going? That kind of gets old. So this is really a good instruction book for that. So the team reset, this is really an evolution of partnering and real alignment. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. The important piece of this is the opportunity to guide and show strong leadership in a really challenging time. In a virtual environment, post-COVID, it's an opportunity for you to lead the conversation around not only what we are here to do, but how we will do that. Again, not whether we'll use Zoom or whether we'll text each other, but this is a real opportunity to explore what we're here to do. In this environment, the opportunity is to reconsider our goals, ensure role clarity of roles and responsibilities, nail down our operating model and cadence. Again, this isn't just moving what we used to do before, all meetings into a virtual environment. This is really exploring what makes sense. And as a leader, investing time, intentional time and space to have that conversation. What can we do to build trust and connection? And what are our virtual team norms? Again, a really valuable conversation around how we will work together. And we'll talk more about that because that's one of our tools as well. There's a couple of tips on how to do this in each of these tools, and you'll get those at the end. But these are the key elements. Reviewing your team goals. In many environments, the priorities have shifted. Let's be overt in having that conversation. How can we use roles and responsibilities different? How might we shift those for the environment? How do we develop new team rhythms? What should that look like? How do we build trust and connection? And how do we develop team norms? Sorry, my screen is cut off with the Zoom, which is what I'm now learning, that you can't see the right side of the screens. I'm going from memory here. Again, the team reset is a really important piece. We at Slalom, we call it a team kickoff because we do them all the time. This we position as more of a team reset to rethink how you might do things. And this is just an overview. You'll get a tool for each one of these that tees up what are the key questions and how should you facilitate that conversation. There's a lot of conversation that can occur, but the important piece is puts each of these elements, or the ones you deem most critical, on the table for conversation. This is a conversation for ideally less than 10 people. So if you have a large group, I'd consider breaking that group apart. And then really documenting the outputs of that conversation and making them available to revisit and review. Any questions on the team kickoff? That's a really rapid version of a team kickoff, team reset. Anything in the chat, Amelia?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay, great, great. So aligning on team norms. These are the unwritten rules usually of how we will engage. This setting of team norms is about how you write them down, how you align on them, and how you agree on them. And there's a lot of research around the fact that this helps teams, this holds teams accountable for how they will operate together versus those implicit assumptions around how one should work. This is engaging in defining the behavior and how we will show up and engage each other. So the best team norms are really created by the entire team. Some call these team agreements. Regardless of what you call them, this is really a conversation around how can we show up for each other? How can we engage? They're specific, they're actionable. There's something we can be proud of together. And it's a real opportunity to carve out based on your values. If you're not having a conversation about values, this is the conversation around how will we operate together? Again, a predecessor to this might be the personal canvas that really is an internal reflection of how we want to work and how we need to work. The team norms is around alignment around those behaviors, considering personal expectations and preferences, and agreement on when the team will commit to those, or how the team will commit to those. They're usually pretty visible, which is obviously way easier when you're in person than it is in a virtual environment. But one opportunity is, how do you show those at the beginning of a meeting and revisit those regularly? They're revisited on a regular basis. You can decide what makes sense. You know, in the old world, it was quarterly, if you will, maybe sometimes annually, but that's not nearly often enough. And I think based on our new environment, we would encourage revisiting these regularly based on what we're learning and the plethora of technology tools. So it's really up to you to say what makes sense for our virtual environment. And again, this could be the people that report to you. This could be about your peer group or any other kind of team you're working with. Let me show you an example. We've got a few examples here. Team norms can be aspirational, they can be logistical, but the best ones are really specific. So this is one of my favorites. We end meetings 5 minutes early to give people a break to move around. Love it. For post-work emergencies or critical questions, we text each other. We don't expect everyone to respond to email after hours. Try and maintain connection. So we use video whenever possible, and we spend the first 5 minutes of a meeting doing a round-robin check-in. Again, these are illustrative examples, but they're that specific. They might have an element of the why, the intention, but they all have a specific agreement, and the team is expected to commit to those or challenge them to make them right for that team. So here's a little exploration of how you might do this. This is about a brainstorm, then a conversation. We would expect that teams would vote on those using now technology tool, ideally, post in a common and visible location, and then review on a regular basis. We use a variety of tools, Miro and idea boards and Mural. They all have an element to make this really easy to do. Any question on team norms? You see anything, Amelia? No.
Clear. I'm curious, has anyone done any of some of these activities with teams as we've kicked off? Like you can write it in the chat, but going to remote work, have people started trying some of this new work, some of these ideas that we're providing? I'd just be curious to see what people are learning along the way.
Anyone offer anything exciting?
I think some people are doing some of the normal processes. I think what's interesting is new norms sort of naturally form as we go to remote, and then the new normal we know won't be like it used to be. So how will we work when some of us are maybe in office and some of us aren't? And
yeah, I think that's a great point. We really don't know at this point whether we will be working in a wholly remote environment, a hybrid environment, or there's still a prospect that we might go wholly remote again. And so this is really an important element and would definitely benefit from comprehending some of those changed circumstances. This is I'm sorry?
Some are doing like daily round robins, kind of what we do, like a daily stand-up, another way to think about it.
Great.
Just to catch up, partly just to see each other.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. The last tool that we've got, you may be quite familiar with, it's the retrospective. And typically this is a tool that we use on project teams, right? To check in to see how we might, what is working well, really reflecting and celebrating, appreciating what's working well. In this environment, this is really important, really important. We are constantly having a conversation around what we need to do better. And this is a good opportunity to really stop and pause and have some intention around appreciating what is working well as a team. And I would say for ourselves, how are we doing? How are we personally improving, and encouraging your team to share that amongst each other. Second, what needs improvement? Where are the opportunities where we can do this better? Perhaps the challenge in working together. The third is, what are some new ideas? So how might we solve for that? Or what if we've seen that we would really like to experiment with and try? That could be everything from a technology tool to engaging our customers or our stakeholders or the public in a new way. And last, next steps. This is a great conversation, but what can we commit to? What are we going to commit to? And that might not be everything, but again, creating intentional space to have this conversation. This is a moment for reflection. Here are a couple of examples of how you might do that in a virtual environment. You can also just have a conversation and use a chat. I mean, some of this feels more daunting, and if that's the case, making space for the conversation is enough. This can be done in a 60 to 90-minute workshop, or it can be embedded in any one of your team's meetings. It's important to drive action, as I mentioned, and celebrate what's going well. Our personal favorite is mural right now, but you know, we're all learning. So use the tool that makes the most sense for you, your teams. So before we head to questions, I wanted to pause for a minute. Does anyone have any questions about the retrospective or any examples that they'd like to share about how to use them? Okay. I think before we head into my favorites, which are my favorite, I think this is an important, that retrospective, I think this is the right time, right? This has been an experiment of 7 weeks. We don't know when it's going to end. And based on reopening plans for your organization, that may be sooner, that may be later, and it might be a hybrid. So I think that this is really whether you start with a personal canvas or you start with the retrospective, there's a different entry point. These aren't intended to be done in serial. They can be, but you can start at any place that feels right for your organization based on where you're at. But they all really complement each other. And so I am more than happy to answer questions today, or you're welcome to reach out to me or Amelia to ask more about those tools. But I wanted to sort of wrap up here in talking about, again, I couldn't resist the list, if you will, but these are my personal favorites. So I thought I'd take the opportunity. I have seen so many lists, so curating your own list is a lot of fun. But with my team, I too have really wanted to do this right. Again, not just for the current situation that we're in, but there's a lot of conversation around how this is a new opportunity for leaders and how this changing world of work will require different things, both from teams and from the leaders that lead them. So in terms of connection, again, those one-on-ones we're having, it's the questions that I'm asking, not how are you doing, how can I support you, but how's your life? And that isn't a question that I've traditionally asked. And it's a really important one to show true and genuine interest in other people. So maybe think about the questions that you ask. Celebrate milestones. Again, how do we do this? Do you call them? How do you actually do this? So you may not be able to drive by every employee's front door to wish them happy birthday, but don't miss the opportunity, again, to celebrate those milestones, open up the meeting, give the open mic to the team and talk about really what's working and what we should celebrate in terms of wins. Post-team socials, this is a mixed bag, right? Some people really want to have a lot of fun. It is important to increase fun wherever you can, whether that is a team that wants to meet for social and play Scrabble, or if that's a team that really says, you know what, this workday is taking me longer to integrate everything from a work-life perspective. I need to wrap sooner. And some of the tools that we talked to before will help you arrive at the right calibration for your team. Use virtual icebreakers to boost the fun wherever you can. These are so much fun. You can be really creative and learn a lot at the same time. And no matter how fun or serious your topic or your team, this is an opportunity and everyone needs a really good laugh. Collaboration. Don't assume that the previous cadence that you had for your team and the operating model in which you work is right for this one. I am sure I am not the only one who tried to port that over and realized that I was sitting for an entire day sometimes. And so you really do need to shake it up, not only for yourselves in terms of your overall wellness and physical and mental health, but really exploring how you might do things differently to focus on what matters most. Consider the 25 and 45-minute meeting. This is awesome. This is really not rocket science. And yet, if you do it, it's life-changing. Allow people some transition. The context switching is challenging, and when you're not moving, it's really tough. Support learning curves in collaboration tools. You know, we've all had them. We don't all know how to use all these tools or use them well or use them in the right way. And so really, how do you get somebody to do a webinar, have your team call in, provide opportunities to really learn how to use these tools in a virtual environment to their best appropriate opportunity. So culture, this is one that is pretty well explored, but again, are you doing it every day? How are you flexible and continuously asking the question around how do I focus on the person, not just the tasks? How do I make that space for that conversation and really focus on building that trust as an empathetic leader? Seeking input from all meeting participants to increase inclusivity. There is a lot of work being done in exploring how inequity is increased by a virtual environment. And so this is a really important one to really explore how much airtime folks have, how you check in at the beginning and the end of a meeting. So there really is participation to increase inclusivity. And showing empathy by changing your questions. Again, how is your life, right? This is an opportunity for all of us to really rethink how we show up and how we lead. Before I end, I was very encouraged in a recent Forbes article that talked about the opportunities for leaders and for teams in this new work environment. And it really focused on how might we not focus on getting through, but how might we focus on the opportunity presented, and not, given the fact that we're probably not going back to the same workplace that we were in before. So how do we decrease walls? How do we build empathy? How can we be more flexible? How might our culture change in introducing some of these more open, discussable topics? How do we increase our comfort with technology at the same time? So this is really the future of work. I'll just end. Slalom has done a lot of work in this space. We're looking forward to introducing new topics, but not only on team effectiveness and increasing performance of your teams, but really in business continuity, adapting to a new workplace, and how might you respond for your organization to COVID, and we're happy to share those with you at any time. So I just want to wrap up by saying thank you. I know this was a rapid fire in terms of tools. Again, we look forward to sharing those with you, but I'll open the floor to any other questions you might have. Anybody in the chat that I can't see right now?
It doesn't look like questions are coming in. I'm curious if people have used any of the tools. It looks like people are doing, like there's some conversation around lots of doing the daily stand up and using Teams to huddle and see one another. One of the things that we've found is using Zoom with sometimes Teams, sometimes Zoom, depending on how big, if you need to do breakout rooms, and then the collaboration tools of Ideas Board and Miro and Mural, like kind of figuring out where we want to, what are those right environments. I think the trick here is there are a lot of tools out there. And one of the lessons learned that we had early on is don't get too worked up in the tool, and it's more about the conversation. The tool should enable it. So if you're spending more time fighting your tool, have the conversation. So that's another quick tip that we learned along the way.
I think the other way to think about some of these tools and conversations is really in the, not just as a response to a remote environment, but in the reentry environment. What should that look like, and how do you create space for those conversations when your organization shifts back in part or in full? It's really an important conversation to ensure agreement around how you will operate, and if that will change or shift from remote or before, in terms of strategy, in terms of operations and working with each other, and how you'll move forward together.
The only other topic in here that is an interesting one, and one that we've been talking about, and it's a little bit about that new work environment that we've started, like we're sort of tipping out that we know it's not going to be the same, but we have a sense of what might be different for office space and office development post-COVID. And we actually do have some new thinking and points of view around this. It might be one of the things we already had a plan of what we thought we might talk about, but things shift so quickly we might move that content up a little bit sooner. So we'll work with Cara around what's the priority and what people are most interested in. The two that we kind of think might be there, because we're all in the midst of doing it right now, is replanning for your business and doing that virtually, as well as, well, what does reentry look like? What do you have to have together? What are the policies? What are the procedures? What's the workflow? And then what could work look like? And what do you need to have? So what's the new working to that point?
Amelia, there was a question earlier around the network. Could you?
Yeah, let me look at
that one.
Like, I mean, to the idea of, I think we have often been using gatherings in meetings that we've gotten together, and now leaning more on LinkedIn. The idea of how do we see maybe future business networking and that teaming of like networks so larger coming together, and what might that look like?
From an in-person environment
to now a virtual one.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is that those won't go away. So if we're talking about networking or building the network, there will always be space for that. I think one of the things that we kind of take a look at is you know, what's the intention of that forum? And so how can you create both an in-person experience as well as virtual ones by virtue of webinar topics? There's a lot of networking going on right now by simply having a conversation around a shared topic, much like we're doing today. And so what's the place for that kind of networking moving forward? I've also seen a fair bit of work, while it's not, you know, a large gathering, that there is some space around targeting people that you really want to have that conversation with, and making sure that you have a real nice picture of who you're reaching out to. So a more targeted approach would also complement that.
But I think last, and we're kind of hitting on time, is there was a comment from Jim Riley around some of the stuff that we're already seeing, such as, you know, alternating people in a cube environment to make sure we're practicing social distancing and looking at office space. And I think to that point that some meetings, some people might be in the office wearing masks, and then you might have half your team still on Zoom. And like, there are new norms that will get created with that as a team, and new expectations. And how do you still work in it when maybe half or more are still on Zoom and a few are in the office? And so pulling some of this content back when that new normal starts coming, because you will do another reset as a team, either purposefully or not.
Yeah, to the earlier question about these gatherings, I wonder how close we will be together, even if we're permitted to gather in small or large groups. How authentic might that connection be or not be, and how are we able to actually connect? And it occurs to me that in the virtual environment, in some ways, it may seem more connected because you have that opportunity to, you know, see my face versus see me behind a mask, and be closer to me than, you know, 6 feet away. So I wish you all luck in this conversation. We are all experimenting and we are all learning, and we look forward to the next opportunity to engage with you on the next webinar.